Up next, remembering Rockville's Chestnut Lodge. Stay with us. Hi, welcome to Paths to the Present. I'm your host, Gail Street. This past summer, the city of Rockville lost one of its most storied landmarks. Early in the morning of Sunday, June the 7th, Chestnut Lodge, once a world-renowned psychoanalytic sanitarium, burned to the ground. The building had been vacant, waiting for its revitalization into some upscale condominiums. Now there is nothing left of the structure that was first built in 1889 as the Woodlawn Hotel. Today's show remembers that Victorian-era building with a look back at a show we completed in 2003. Then we bring you a success story that will help keep the memory of Chestnut Lodge alive. But first, try your hand at this history quiz. This person achieved many firsts for women in Montgomery County. Born in 1900, she came to Rockville in the early 30s, where she worked professionally for more than 60 years. In 1958, she was the first woman to serve as a foreman of a Montgomery County grand jury. In 1968, she was the first woman to be named Man of the Year by the Rockville Chamber of Commerce. And 20 years later, she was the first woman to be honored by the Rockville Rotary Club. Think you know who this is? Stay tuned. I'll give you the answer at the end of the show. Early in 2003, Paths to the Present devoted an entire show to Rockville's Chestnut Lodge. We had help from Eileen McGuckian, who was then executive director of Peerless Rockville. At the time, the future of the building was in question. It was on the market, and everyone hoped that this wonderful old building would be given a new life. Now that's no longer possible, and all that's left is photographs and memories of Chestnut Lodge, as well as our video. As a tribute to the building, we'd like to play some excerpts for you now. When the Metropolitan branch of the B&O Railroad opened a station here in Rockville, this community became a summer destination point for city dwellers. To accommodate them, several hotels were built in the area. One of them was called Woodlawn.
The Woodlawn Hotel was and still is a very grand hotel. In fact, it's the only one that's left of Rockville's hotels. And it was built around 1887 and took a while to get going, but by 1889, there are advertisements in the local papers, come out on the train and come out to these beautiful rolling hills above sea level and away from the mosquitoes of Washington in the summers, and we'll pick you up at the train station and bring you out here. And once you're out here, you'll be among the beautiful chestnut trees, and you could come into this gorgeous four-story Second Empire-style mansard-roofed building and take a room here and spend a weekend, spend a couple of days, spend the entire summer, which people did, and it was only open in the summers or in the nice weather. And the advertisements talk about the amenities of electric lights and gas and water from artesian wells, which was fresh country water, and country vegetables around. And you know, here you are out in the country and you're getting out of the big city, and you and your family are enjoying yourselves.
But in less than 10 years, Rockville's resort boom was over, and the Woodlawn Hotel had to be sold. Ernest Bullard, a psychiatrist from Milwaukee, purchased the property in order to open up a psychiatric sanitarium. He renamed it Chestnut Lodge for the 125 chestnut trees that surrounded the main building at the time.
The family came in 1908. They took a couple of years to set it up and set up all the medical issues that were related to it and so on, and change it from a hotel into a patient hospital. I understand that they opened with 2 patients and expanded that to some 20 patients by the 1920s. There were obviously wonderful places for the patients to roam, and that was part of the therapy. They probably during those early years changed from having outhouses to indoor plumbing. The Bullards lived in the hotel on the first floor. when they first came, and then after a while, I'm not sure exactly when, but after a while they built a cottage right behind the hotel for the family, and they called it Little Lodge, and lived there until 1935. So it was really one big family with the medical administrator and the physicians on staff and the patients.
Ernest Bullard's only child, Dexter, took over the institution after his father's death in 1931. In the coming years, he transformed Chestnut Lodge into a nationally recognized psychoanalytic hospital. This institution's success is due in part to this woman, Frieda Fromm-Reichman, a German Jewish refugee. She joined the staff at Chestnut Lodge in 1935 after Dexter Bullard agreed to build her this cottage. This wooden two-story Cape Cod is still known as Friedas Cottage. She lived here until her death in 1957. One analyst who was drawn to the lodge is Anne Louise Silver. She began working there in 1975. She says that even though Frieda Fromm-Reichman had passed away 20 years earlier, her presence at Chestnut Lodge lived on.
It was as if her ghost was there, her presence was there at the meetings. Her book, Principles of Intensive Psychotherapy, is still in print, available in paperback from University of Chicago Press. Everybody training in mental health then, and still very many people, have that assigned to them as required reading.
Dexter Bullard, along with Frieda Fromm-Reichman, built a national and international reputation that endured. Their annual symposia drew people from far and wide to share ideas.
At the heyday, there was a waiting list of 2 years for patients who wanted, or families who wanted their family member treated there. 2-year waiting list, and there was also a 2-year waiting list to come on the medical staff. So it really was an extremely special place, and kind of a hallowed grounds kind of feeling still persists.
The building itself became famous as the setting for I Never Promised You a Rose Garden, Joanna Greenberg's 1964 bestseller. In addition, it was the inspiration for the 1964 film Lilith. Warren Beatty and Gene Seberg play star-crossed lovers who meet at a psychiatric institute in a small town much like Rockville. While Chestnut Lodge was not used as a location, many scenes were shot in Montgomery County. In 1969, ownership of Chestnut Lodge passed to eldest son Dexter Means Bullard Jr., nicknamed Rusty. He continued to operate the lodge until his death in the mid-90s. By now, it was a 132-room facility. These modern dormitories were built for the patients. Inside, the rooms resembled apartments. In 1997, the property was sold to CPC Health, who maintained it as a psychiatric facility. Unfortunately, this was the beginning of the end for Chestnut Lodge. After declaring bankruptcy, Chestnut Lodge was sold to the Washington Waldorf School in 2001. Sadly, costs for the renovations exceeded the school's resources, and the property is on the market again. While the future of this facility is unclear, its significance to our community remains.
In addition to its history as a hotel and as a psychiatric institution over 3 generations, it is one of Rockville's grandest green spaces. The majestic trees, the open lawns, the beautiful hotel, the historic buildings in the back, all of that together makes a wonderful entrance into Rockville.
Toward the end of 2003, Chestnut Lodge Properties acquired the 20-plus acres of land for redevelopment. They began building new homes in the back, but 5 of the acres were not to be touched, along with 3 historic structures. Sadly, after the fire, only 2 of the 3 remain. As of this taping, the developer has no plans for the land where the original Chestnut Lodge stood. Little Lodge is being restored for a private owner. The other, Friedas Cottage, is the topic of our success story today. The house known as Friedas Cottage was built in 1936 for Dr. Frieda Fromm-Reichman, a renowned psychoanalyst who worked at Chestnut Lodge until her death in 1957. In 2007, the building was deeded to Peerless Rockville with some seed money for its restoration. Not long after, Mary Van Balgoy took over Peerless when Eileen McGuckian retired. She explains why the donation of this house made sense.
Peerless Rockville interprets and protects Rockville's heritage. So it was a natural fit for the developer to give the property to Peerless so that we could begin to tell the story of Chestnut Lodge. And also as a resource for people to come and visit, because places matter. And it's much easier to imagine what was here on this site when you have something to look at. Of course, it's become more imperative now that Chestnut Lodge, the main building, has burned down.
When Peerless acquired the house, it had been vacant for 7 years. It was structurally sound, but a real mess. They enlisted volunteers to help with the restoration process.
We had 7 years of debris in the house, so we needed help with that. The yard had been unkempt, and so we needed help with that. And then also just helping us research the history of the house. And we had many volunteers work on that, and that was really good for us.
The goal was to return the house to residential use and rent it to a family. But more specifically, they hoped to make it look like it did when Frieda lived there, and they succeeded.
If Frieda came back to life, she would definitely recognize her own house. It's a wonderful 1936 colonial revival style house. It's 1.5 stories, and in fact it still has the 2 doors, one door leading to the reception room inside where Frieda patients waited, and then of course her office right next door, and then her living room and kitchen dining room area. Then going upstairs, of course, would be her old bedroom as well as her guest bedroom.
To give it the feel of a mid-20th century home, the kitchen was fitted with these retro appliances. As you can see, it's a very small space. That's because Fromm-Reichman rarely cooked. Most of her meals came from the kitchen at Chestnut Lodge. Now that the original Chestnut Lodge is gone, Friedas Cottage is the public's only link to the sanitarium that once made history here. Thankfully, Peerless will use it to do just that.
There are many ways that we can use the house to interpret Chestnut Lodge and its history. One, of course, is to have house tours. The house is open at least 5 times per year. And then, of course, through other programming such as having an event on site or a walking tour or even our website.
An effort like this requires the hard work of many people, and some of the principals gathered for a celebration photo late last spring. The reason? Friedas Cottage was honored with 2 preservation awards, one at the county level and one at the state. Congratulations to everyone involved. So, did you figure out the answer to our history quiz? Ann Wilson Bullard, wife of Chestnut Lodge's second owner, Dexter, worked at Chestnut Lodge in various capacities for more than 60 years. During that time, she contributed much to her community, earning quite a few firsts for women. Among other things, she was the first woman to head a Montgomery County grand jury, the first woman to be named Man of the Year by Rockville's Chamber of Commerce, and the first woman to be honored by the Rockville Rotary Club. Ann Wilson died at age 96, leaving behind quite a legacy. Well, that's all the time we have for this show. If you have comments for us or ideas for future shows, send an email to paths.present@verizon.net. Be sure to tune in again next time as we follow more paths to the present. See you then.